I'm really glad to be here to talk to you about frogs. I have a great passion for frogs and for water. And so to get us started, I'll just tell you a little bit about what I plan to cover today and show off a few pictures of these amazing creatures we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career path real quickly, and then some general information, because I don't know exactly what everybody knows about frogs and toads. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. Then we're going to go out in the field and listen to these different animals call. They all have a unique call, just like a bird does. They have a lot of problems though nowadays. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about those and ways that you can help us sustain these different frog populations in West Virginia. So I'm from an area called Canaan Valley, and Canaan Valley has one of the largest wetland complexes in the whole state of West Virginia. So I don't think it's any surprise that I really like wetlands and frogs. I went to school at Marshall University, and there I got involved in the biology club. I started working with the Marshall Herpetology Club too, and herpetology is a study of reptiles and amphibians. So you might not recognize me, but here I am in my waders, and you might notice it's pitch dark around us because that's when we go out and do our research. And we did our research under the great Dr. Polly noted here. I did my thesis on frog calls. So it's actually something I studied to get my master's degree. I would put data loggers out, and then I would analyze the different frog calls to determine populations. So if a lot of frogs are calling, I could count that and I could figure out how many frogs were in that pond. Next, I went and worked with the Mon National Forest, where I got to hug bears, hold owls, and put up boxes, along with many other things. And it was a wonderful experience. And if you haven't been to the Mon National Forest, I certainly encourage you to go. It has lots of great wildlife and amphibians inside of it. Then I started working for DEP, which is the Department of Environmental Protection. And lo and behold, I started working with water there. I think that water is something that has followed me throughout my career. And of course, water and wetlands and frogs are all connected. And if you're not sure how, I'll be showing you how during this presentation. So let's get started with the basics. Let's look at the classification of animals. So animals are broken down into vertebrates or invertebrates. And that's just a fancy word to say if you have a backbone or not. Now we do have backbones. That's how I can set up right here and talk to you today. And frogs do as well. And they are down in a class here called amphibians. So they also have slimy skin. They lay their eggs in water. So water is very important to them. And they're cold-blooded, which means whenever the temperature changes to get hot outside, they get warmer. Whenever it's really cold, they're really cold. So unlike us, we're warm-blooded. They are cold-blooded animals. So what makes a frog an amphibian anyways? Well, they have a double life, and you might have seen these animals before, but before a frog turns into an adult frog, it first is a tadpole. And before that, it's a little tiny egg, like an embryo, and it develops and metamorphoses, it absorbs its tail, grows legs, and then it becomes an adult. And of course, they have vertebrae, and they're cold-blooded, and they breathe through their skin, and they have lungs. The coolest thing about frogs is that they can vocalize. So unlike many other amphibians like salamanders, these animals can actually call to each other just like birds can. And that's something that's very unique to them. So where do these frogs live at anyways? Well, they live pretty much anywhere you might find water in West Virginia. All of our water is fresh water. And sometimes it's just along a little ditch along a road. And they really like this habitat because there's so much vegetation down through here and the water is really shallow. What they don't like is this road being right here. So whenever you're driving, especially in the springtime, keep an eye out for these frogs because they might be jumping across the road to get into this ditch. They also like big open water like this with lots of vegetation. That vegetation allows them to hide down underneath there, to lay their eggs, or to hunt. So the vegetation is very important to them. They also can be found in puddles. So if you're a horseback rider and you're walking through mud with your horse, there's little indentments that the hoofs make in the mud can be excellent habitat for frogs. And toads like this stuff too whenever they are breeding, but most find them out in the forest. So that's one difference between a frog and a toad. So if we look at this graph here, there's deeper water over here. So imagine this is a pond or a wetland. There's deep water here, and this might be where we find fish and different animals. But most of the frogs we're going to find up here towards the bank. And that's because there's so much vegetation, and they really like this vegetation. It's camouflage to them so they can blend in and also lay their eggs there. Now, toads, we will find up here higher, out of the water. They don't have to be along water their whole life. So let's learn a little bit more about frogs. So there's a word that I'm going to use a couple of times today, and I want to explain it to you so you know what it means. And that word is called a neuron. And you can practice saying that at home if you want. A neuron. A neuron is a really fancy word for frogs and toads. It's because it means tailless. They do not have a tail. So all frogs and toads are considered aneurons. They're scaleless too. So they're not like a lizard. They don't have any scales on them. They have a transparent inner eyelid to protect them underwater, as you can see here. They have webbed feet because they are really good swimmers. And a cool thing is, if you ever see a frog swallow something, they actually will shut their eyes because they use the pressure of their eyes shutting to push food down their throat. So if you want to practice swallowing like a frog at home, you would shut your eyes every time you swallow. They have also been around on planet Earth since dinosaurs have been here. And frogs live on every continent except Antarctica. And they can jump really far. Some of them can even jump 20 times their body length. Can you imagine jumping that far? And of course, baby frogs are called tadpoles. So let's talk about what frogs eat, or let's talk about some things that I don't really like having in my backyard. Most of these animals would fall under that. And these are all different types of things that frogs and toads will eat, especially bugs. They really like those. And some of our larger frogs will actually even eat mice and birds. So let's watch this short video to see them in action.
Take the bullfrog, for example. They'll eat spiders, scorpions, rodents, snakes, fish, and just about anything else that passes in front of them.
So you might not have realized that, but this is this is a bullfrog, and bullfrogs will essentially eat anything that they can fit inside of their mouth, including other bullfrogs. So good thing that we are bigger than them. So let's look at the differences between a frog and a toad. Well, number one, everybody knows if you kiss a frog, it turns into a prince. Oh, I guess not. Okay, well, hang on. Everybody knows that if you hold a toad, you get warts, right? Nope, that doesn't happen either. Okay, so what are the differences? Well, frogs usually live near water. They live near swamps, seeps, and ponds, and they have smooth, slimy skin. They're really fast too. So if you are walking around the edge of a pond and you hear something plunk into the water, it probably was a frog, because they're so fast sometimes we won't even see them. Toads, on the other hand, are much more slow and relaxed. They're kind of like miniature bulldogs. You will see they're present because they will set up very stert and be looking around at you. They have dry, bumpy skin, so their skin feels really different. And they don't usually live near water. They only go to the water to lay eggs. Otherwise, we'd find them in our forest, yard, or pasture. And the reason for that is because frogs do not have a certain defense mechanism that toads do. If you've ever seen a toad before, or if you see one this spring, look on its back and they have these two big glands on the back, right behind their eyes. Those are called parotoid glands. And inside of those glands, there is a thing called a bufotoxin. That toxin is not very good for many animals to ingest. It can make them sick. And a lot of animals already know that. So they avoid toads. So a toad kind of has some armor because they have this toxin that they carry on their back. Frogs do not. That's why they're much faster. So if you ever see your doggie at home and it is going up and smelling on a toad, make sure that it doesn't put the toad in its mouth because it can make your dog sick. So I would recommend a stuffed frog instead. So let's look at some more differences between frogs and toads. Now this is a wood frog and this is an American toad. Both of these species we have here in West Virginia. So just by looking at them, you can tell that they are pretty different. These have bumps, they hold themselves differently. These have really large webbed feet. They're very smooth. And we can tell this is a wood frog because it has this black mask behind its eye here. So whenever they mate, it's a thing called amplexus. And you can tell the females on both species are much bigger. So that's because they're full of eggs. So they're carrying all those eggs inside of them. Whenever they lay eggs, their eggs look really different too. And this is the time of the year when they are out laying eggs. So if you have an area around your house or a park that you visit, I would encourage you to check in the little shallow areas to see if you find any frog or toad eggs. If you find wood frog eggs, they're being clumps like this, and they're attached to vegetation. They attach them to the vegetation so that they can't sink down to the bottom and they can stay up towards the top where the water is warmer. Over here, you might notice that these look like long ribbons, and that's exactly what they are. We call them ribbons, and they lay about 4,000 to 8,000 eggs. 4,000 to 8,000 eggs, can you imagine? Wood frogs, on the other hand, lay many less, but it still can be up in the 1,000. So if we look closer at them, you can see this is one big jelly clump of eggs, and then this is two different single strands. And each egg is partitioned out. 2 to 4 months into these eggs being laid, the animal will metamorph and emerge into a frog. And we can see it still has its little black mask right there. So this is a baby wood frog. And over here, the American toad, it only takes 1 to 2 months. So it's a much quicker process for them to metamorph and turn into little toadlets. Let's look a little bit closer about how tadpoles form. Oops, sorry about that. right, so that gives you a really generalization. Each frog and toad develops a little bit differently, but they all follow the same steps there. And I have some resources that I can share to Kevin for you. If you are interested in going out and checking out frog eggs and trying to identify which animal is which, we have a couple little charts here that you can follow that might help you out. So if you start here in the middle of the circle of this chart, all of these animals lay their eggs in water as a starting point, except for this one salamander. And then it says if they're laid in long strands, which all of our toads do lay them in ribbons like that. And then all the other ones are going to be in clumps or masses. So you can follow this chart and try to identify some different animals if you'd like. Now let's look at where these animals are located across the globe. So anywhere where it's a darker blue color, that means that we have a lot of amphibians in that area. And up here in West Virginia, we can see that we're kind of in this area here. And let's look at how many we have in our state. So in West Virginia, we have 14 different species of frogs and toads. We have 3 toads and 11 different frogs. And many of them are found in every single county. So that means they have a statewide distribution. And the sizes range from 1.5 inches, which is really little, about the size of a quarter, all the way up to 7 inches, which is bigger than my hand. And what's pretty neat about these animals is that they vocalize, like I said. So, whoops, sorry about that. So only the males can vocalize, and they do that following this or using this vocal sac right here. So this is a little spring peeper, and this is a toad, and you might see that that is inflated. So the males push air over that, and it creates a vibration sound, and that's how they vocalize. So the females cannot do that, but the males can, but then the females can hear it. And so they do this seasonally. They do this with different temperature changes and with different rainfalls. And like I said, right now is the time for them to be singing. So now let's look at all these different animals that we have in West Virginia. And I would like for you to try to remember their calls, because sometimes we can't always see them with our eyes, but we can hear them. So you can still know that they're present just by hearing them. So the first animal I'm going to tell you about is the eastern spadefoot toad. And it has a really weird call. It has a gagging, like a sheep sound, and it has this cool little spade foot on the back of its leg that it can actually use to burrow in backwards in sandy areas. So let's listen to it call. So again, those are just the males calling there, and they have a pretty unique call, don't they? The other toad that we have is the Eastern American toad. And we can tell this is an Eastern American toad because it only has 1 to 2 warts per black spot. So they have these big black spots on the back, and they usually only have 1 to 2 warts on there. There's a few other ways to tell that they're an American toad, but that's probably the easiest one. They have a really long trill that kind of sounds like a cricket. So let's give it a listen. Did anybody hold their breath that whole time? That's a really long call, isn't it? And the final toad that we have in West Virginia is called the Fowler's toad. Now you might notice it has more than 2 warts per black spot. So that's one way that we can tell them apart. The Fowler's toad is also found in lower elevations across West Virginia, and the American toad we'd find in every single place in the state. Their calls are really different. So let's see if you can tell the difference. So it's much shorter, and instead of a trill, it's more of a wah. So you can try making that call at home. Now let's move on to our little guys. These are called the northern spring peepers, and they're about this big. They have a really loud sound though, and if you have a bunch of them calling at once, it can almost be deafening. And of course, a lot of people associate them with springtime because we start hearing their peeps whenever spring starts to come along. Here's what they sound like. And you might notice that they have this X across their back. And that's one way that we can tell that it's a spring peeper, but an easier way is just to listen and hear them. Next, we have the mountain chorus frog. The mountain chorus frog is very common. We find it all across West Virginia as well. And it's actually found in most roadside ditches. So if you're driving along in the springtime with the windows down and you hear some animals calling, I bet it's the mountain chorus frog. Let's see if you recognize its call. There you go. I bet some people are like, oh, that's a mountain chorus frog. So now you know. Another little frog that we have is the upland chorus frog. And this is only found over in the Eastern Panhandle. It looks really similar, but it sure does have a different call. So hopefully you can tell the difference there. Next is the gray tree frog. And we have two sibling species in West Virginia. So they're a little bit different, but their calls are pretty similar. And they have these really cool toe digits right here. So you might see them stuck on the side of your house eating bugs from your light at nighttime. They're really pretty and they range in color quite a bit. Here's what their call sounds like. I bet you've heard that one before too. And now on to our big mama. This is our bullfrog. Remember, they will eat anything that they can fit in their mouth, and fittingly so, their call sounds kind of like a cow. Next up, we have the northern green frog. The northern green frog is found in every single county in West Virginia, and it sounds kind of like a banjo string being plucked. Next up, we have the northern leopard frog. This is our one frog in West Virginia that is a species of concern. So it used to be here quite a bit, and now we only find it in a couple locations along the Ohio River. It has a pretty cool sound though. Sounds like a snore kind of. And one animal that gets confused with the leopard frog all the time is the pickerel frog. It has this orange color down here on its belly, and it's found in every single county in West Virginia. And it sounds a little different, but they are kind of similar. And we also have the wood frog, which is maybe one of my favorite frogs. It has this black mask again, and it's one of my favorite frogs because it's also found in Alaska, and it can freeze up to 65% of the water in its body. So it's a pretty neat little critter. It is actually the very first frog that we will have emerge in West Virginia. So even though everybody thinks of the spring peeper as being springtime, actually the wood frog is even earlier than that. And here's what their call sounds like. So they are really neat, but if you're not out early in the spring, you will miss those animals calling. And the last one we have is the eastern cricket frog. These are found in the Eastern Panhandle. They're again pretty small, about 2 inches, and they have a really unique call. It's pretty weird, huh? So let's cover some threats to frogs and toads real quickly, because I know we're getting close on our time. The main thing is habitat destruction. So we build a lot of roads and we drain a lot of wetlands. As you have seen, they have to have those wetlands to live in and especially to lay their eggs in. Water pollution and pesticides can also lead to some deformities with frogs. And the warming climate is causing some of them to have issues with finding good water sources to lay their eggs in. We also have droughts and funguses like chytrid that are spreading and killing off some of our frogs. So it's really important if you go to a wetland and you have boots on and you plan on going into another wetland that you scrub your boots clean so that you're not taking any of these disease or funguses with you and transmitting them to each wetland. And of course, we have invasive species and the pet trade. So it is illegal in West Virginia to collect any frogs and put them into commercial use in the pet trade. So why are these anurans, which are tellus amphibians, remember, why are they so important? Well, they are very diverse. We have very unique looking animals. They're found on every continent except for Antarctica, and they really are good indicators to tell us if something is wrong with the water. So if you were going to go fishing and you went over to your pond and you saw a bunch of dead frogs in it, you would know that something is definitely wrong with that water. They're very sensitive to that pollution. So we call them bioindicators. They also eat all those different little bugs that we checked out earlier. So it's very important that we have them around to keep these bugs in check. So they're a great source of food to many other animals too. Some snakes and animals and mammals eat them. And if you would like to attract them to your backyard, you can always put out a toad house. They really like those. Make sure that you use natural gardening, so no pesticides. And you can create a pond. I just created one a couple years ago and I already have frogs that have found it. And of course, planting a tree always helps. And here's our little toad in his toad house. If you'd like to learn more, there's other resources available like common wetland plants. You can always visit Marshall University's herpetology page, and the West Virginia DNR has nice booklet you can download on salamanders and snakes and frogs and toads. They also have regulations that you might want to check out and a nice checklist. So if you want to try to find every frog that we have in West Virginia, you can download their checklist. So I think that frogs and toads are pretty cool. And I hope that after listening in today that you think so too. And the best way to spread the word is by talking to each other about how we can protect and preserve these animals. So if you have any questions, Kevin, I'm not sure if we have time to answer them now, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are some.
Thank you so much, Tomi. This was really wonderful for me. I know that I'm hearing frogs every night now, which is so exciting. What we will do is, because we're not able to take questions in this format right now, we will share Tomi's contact information in the follow-up email along with the recording. And so I'm sure she would be happy to try to answer any of your questions. And I just wanted to give a few quick announcements is that we're going to continue next week as well. Even though many schools will be closed next Friday, we will share a video at the same regular time at 1 p.m. that you can watch with your class or with your family, which will be great. And then starting the second Friday in April, we'll have an awesome presentation about owls. And then continue on through April. So look for that email that we'll be sending with the recording for today, and you'll see the schedule for the upcoming virtual field trips in April, same time, Friday at 1 p.m., and using the same link that you've used up until now. I just want to make one more plug for the Joint Educator Workshop that Tomi is going to be present for at Waldo and Summers County, as will I, as will Linda Carnell with Project Learning Tree. So that's a great opportunity. It's free. And we'll also include that information in the follow-up email. So thank you all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend. See you next week.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.